In Texas, Mexicans have always been there, and the people who were there before we had a country called Mexico. So there's not this sense that Mexicans are foreigners.
Hi, I'm Nick Gillespie with ReasonTV, and today we are talking with Avik Roy. He is the president and co-founder of the Foundation for Research on Equal Opportunity. Thanks for talking to us, Avik.
Hey, Nick.
And you also call it FREOPP.
FREOPP, F-R-E-O-P-P, one E.
Okay, FREOPP.org. What are you trying to do with this new organization?
Well, our mission is to expand economic opportunity to those who least have it, using the tools of free enterprise, limited government, and technological innovation. Our idea is that you and I know, Nick, that free markets have lifted more people out of poverty than anything that has ever been invented by man. And yet a lot of us in the free market community don't talk about free markets in that way. We don't really try to explain to people who aren't already with us how free markets can make their lives better. So our goal is to create a think tank where every scholar that we hire, every op-ed that we publish, every white paper that we generate will have to center its arguments around how a free market-oriented policy reform can make life better for people with below median incomes or net worth.
You recently spoke at an event that your organization, FREOPP and Reason, sponsored about diversity and kind of libertarian issues or diversity and conservatives. And it was really a chance to talk about how little traditionally libertarians and conservatives have really reached out to minorities, particularly blacks, but also Latinos and Asians and others. Talk a little bit about how that issue intersects with what you're doing there and also your location in Texas, because you're big on Texas as a model for not simply for governance, because Texas is kind of it's a relatively low tax state and a relatively low service state that's doing very well in terms of people want to move there, but it's also an incredibly diverse state, and it seems to have escaped many of the kind of racial and ethnic clashes that we see in other parts of the country.
Let's start with the Texas aspect of it. So, as you alluded to the degree that there are conservatives and libertarians out there who fear a more diverse America because they worry that, say, Mexicans or Asians don't come from the Anglo-American political tradition, I think Texas is a good counterexample to hopefully make them think that that's not necessarily what the outcome will be. Texas is a majority-minority state, which is one of the freest states in the country by many of the indices that you and I follow closely. Right. And it's not just a free country, a free state in the sense of just policy, but there really is a sense that everyone feels, whether white or Anglo or Latino or neither of those categories, that freedom has made their lives better. Hispanics in Texas vote routinely 45% for the Republican Party, to the degree we associate Republicans with a more free market agenda. And that's seen in the way that Anglos and Latinos and others engage with each other. There just isn't that sense, the way in other parts of America, there's a sense, well, these immigrants are coming in and they're changing our communities in ways we don't like. In Texas, Mexicans have always been there, and the people who were there before we had a country called Mexico. So right. There's not this sense that Mexicans are foreigners. There's very much a sense that actually the Anglos were the ones who came in right. and took Texas over from the Mexicans, and that this community, this indigenous thing that we call Tex-Mex, has been around for a very long right. time. So that sense of simply not treating the others as if they were the others, that we're all Texans together, and that unites Texans, that simple attitude adjustment, shall we say. It's not an adjustment for them, but that attitude makes a huge difference. And people can tell. I think what we underappreciate sometimes in people who are in politics and intellectual circles, how much every American or every person has that intuitive sense of whether you accept them as a fellow countryman or whether you don't. And in Texas, there's people understand that there's that genuine acceptance. And I think a big part of what we're trying to do at FREOPP is to help people appreciate that there have been basically the approach that you see a lot of Republicans take about minority outreach is to concede, is to believe that the only way to appeal to minorities is through more statism, to say that, well, minorities like statism, and so we have to be more statist in order to appeal to them.
Or else then you just write them off.
Or write them off, right? Or just give up because, well, we're not statists, therefore we're just not going to bother. And our view is totally the opposite of that. Our view is that actually there are a lot of people who are non-white in America who actually are entrepreneurial, who value liberty, and simply we just haven't been recognizing that they're just as American as we are. That, you know, somebody who comes here from India or Mexico, but who's born, or his parents do, but who's born here, is just as American as someone whose parents came here from Sweden or Germany or England, who happens to be born here.
Talk a little bit about your political or ideological arc. We've mentioned you've worked with Rick Perry and you've worked with Mitt Romney in the past. You also worked as an advisor for Marco Rubio. Are you a Republican? Are you a conservative? Are you a libertarian? How do you define yourself, and how did you get that way?
Growing up, I wasn't particularly politically conscious. I didn't really.
And you grew up in Michigan?
In Michigan, so suburbs of Detroit and Oakland County, where my dad worked. I think I was instinctively conservative, but I didn't really know it growing, because I didn't even know what these terms meant. But as time went on, I came to appreciate, particularly when it came to communism versus America, I was very much in the American side of that event. I would go back to India sometimes to visit my relatives, and my relatives are from a part of India that was then run at the state level by the Communist Party, West Bengal. So I'd go back there and argue with my relatives when I was 7 years old about the invasion of Afghanistan by the Soviet Union and how terrible that was, and they were on the wrong side of that. And so that made me sort of, I was unconsciously perhaps conservative or on the right, not really knowing what that meant. And I thought of myself perhaps as somewhere in between. I was like a libertarian, and then I became more conservative in the sense that I came to appreciate culture as mattering and not merely individual liberty, that individual liberty matters. It's perhaps a Hayekian argument that liberty and order go together and can't be completely separated from one another. And I started to really read a lot of political philosophy in my 20s, and became more conservative actually as a result of that, in the sense of the Edmund Burke, Aristotle, David Hume, Richard Weaver kind of school of conservatism, believing that the culture mattered more.
And you believe, I mean, you tend to be an incrementalist in your thinking. You're not looking to pull everything up root and branch, but rather to modify stuff in a direction that you find more effective.
Yeah, so when I left school and actually got into the workforce, that was what started to move me in more of a libertarian direction. I think particularly being in the investment community where I was and seeing how the business world worked, I came to really appreciate the libertarian critique of statism in the sense of understanding economic incentives and understanding how well-intentioned, even conservative well-intentioned policies that try to regulate human behavior often will result in perverse incentives and bad outcomes. And so based on that sense of outcomes really mattering, I became certainly more economically libertarian, and even on issues related to social issues and culture. I think where I'm sort of in between libertarians and conservatives is I don't dismiss, again, the importance of culture, the importance of intact families, for example, the importance of our cultural inheritance in shaping how we look at the world and how we engage with our communities. I think that's very important, particularly on issues of race, right? I think it's very important to understand that if you're black and you're the descendant of slaves, that's going to affect your community and the way you interact with America in a way that's just different than if you're white. And we can't just assume that, well, just because you're born today in a post-civil rights world, it's all gone, it's all erased. So I think that is something that conservatives, the Burkean type of conservative, understands, that I think I still believe in.
I would like to challenge that, and I mean, it seems to me that that's one of the places where I think conservatives and typical Republicans refuse to believe that. They are like, no, come on, look at all we've given you. We fought the Civil War for you, we've given you this, we did affirmative action, and you're still complaining that cops roused you more often than me as a white person. And I suspect it's an interesting switch, that it's the libertarians who are more thick in the culture and realize that you can't just flip things on and off.
I think you're absolutely right, and I agree with what you just said. What I meant it more sort of perhaps in a more philosophical and kind of abstract way, that strictly speaking a philosophically consistent conservatism as opposed to American political conservatism. Right. Philosophically consistent, a Burkean conservative would understand theoretically the importance of that inheritance, where the American political conservatism perhaps does not.
Let's close it out by talking about Donald Trump, who's a fascinating character in the ways that you're talking about, because he, in comical ways, I mean, when he says, like, I'm a self-made man, I got a small loan of $1 million from my father, and look at me now, I'm a big success. I started with nothing. But it's the rhetoric of, self-uplift and pulling yourself up by bootstraps. He's also uses political connections whenever he can. He is the Republican president, but he's not really conservative. Is he going? Is he going, he's brash, he uproots things. Is he going to be good or bad, do you think, for entrepreneurship, for the types of people that you're trying to reach in FREOPP, those people who are below the median income? Because he actually certainly more than Mitt Romney. The only thing Mitt Romney said about the 47% was, like, forget them. They're not going to vote for me anyway. He spoke to black crowds directly. He spoke to poor people. He spoke to poor whites. What is your sense about Donald Trump and the project that you're working on at FREOPP?
I think we have to start with any new president and hope for the best. Hope that we have the best outcome, that what you just described, his aspirations of helping lower income Americans who are struggling in this economy, that it succeeds. That whether it's the free market stuff or the non-free market stuff that you and I might look askance at, whatever the end of the policy ends up being, let's hope that it succeeds and that people rise up from it. It's certainly my view that the policies that are more market-oriented, that are directed towards improving job growth in areas where there hasn't been any, are going to be very important. And I think that what Donald Trump has shown us is that, and this is what we were talking about at the forum that you mentioned earlier, how important dignity is in politics. I think so often people like us, we get caught up in ideology, in philosophy, in economic policy. We forget how much people are willing to vote for someone who they might even disagree with on economics, but who they believe actually really cares about people like them and recognizes the dignity of the way they're trying to live their lives and their aspirations. And Donald Trump did that for a lot of people who don't traditionally vote Republican, who are white. And we've just got to hope that over time, free marketeers are able to do that same service for people who are not white.
All right, well, we will leave it there. We have been talking with Avik Roy. He's the co-founder and president of the Foundation for Research on Equal Opportunity, also called FREOPP, FREOPP.org. Avik, thanks so much for talking to us.
Nick, it's an honor.